Security! My father is confused and disrupting your office, my son David called out across the crowded reception area, his voice carrying through marble hallways where 20 other clients turned to witness what appeared to be an elderly father having a breakdown during routine legal consultation. I'd been sitting quietly in the leather waiting chair for maybe 10 minutes, reviewing documents David had insisted I sign immediately. Something about urgent estate planning and simplified financial management that required my signature before the end of business today. Dad's completely confused about legal documents, David had announced loudly to the receptionist, the other attorneys, and anyone within hearing distance. He keeps asking these paranoid questions about power of attorney forms and guardianship procedures. We're just trying to help him organize his affairs before his condition gets worse. The security guard approached hesitantly, while other families consulting attorneys watched what looked like necessary intervention with a difficult elderly relative. Several people pulled out phones, probably thinking they were witnessing another sad case of family dealing with dementia. "Sir, perhaps we should step outside and discuss this calmly," the guard suggested, clearly unsure how to handle family drama in a prestigious law firm. I stayed quiet. They mistook my silence for weakness, but David didn't know who I was. And this didn't start at the law office. It started 3 months ago when I discovered David had been researching emergency guardianship procedures and expedited elder care placement. Some of you know exactly how this feels, watching your own son perform your legal destruction in front of strangers who assume you're too confused to understand what's happening to you. And that was only the beginning. Maybe I should have noticed the warning signs 3 months earlier when David started bringing his wife Linda to our family discussions about my retirement planning. Every conversation drifted toward my supposed inability to handle complex legal matters alone. Dad's been making concerning decisions about his estate planning, David announced during one meeting with my longtime financial advisor. Last week he forgot which beneficiary forms he'd already completed. Yesterday he couldn't remember the terms of his insurance policies. None of that was accurate. I'd been deliberately asking repetitive questions to test David's eagerness to document my supposed mental decline. The beneficiary form confusion was fabricated entirely. The insurance policy discussion never happened. "Mr. Robert, managing multiple financial instruments can become overwhelming," my advisor had said, reviewing what appeared to be a pattern of concerning incidents. Perhaps some family assistance would be helpful during this transition period. Linda would sit quietly during these meetings, taking detailed notes on her phone about everything I said. Later, she'd discuss my inappropriate responses to legal questions and difficulty understanding basic financial concepts. "He keeps asking the same questions about legal authority and power of attorney," Linda had whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "Yesterday, he accused us of changing his beneficiary information when we were just trying to help organize his paperwork. That accusation was correct. Linda had been altering my documentation, then claiming I'd forgotten making those changes myself. But I let them present it as evidence of cognitive decline. People reveal everything when they think you're watching them destroy your legal rights and can't do anything about it. I should have noticed the first sign. What David didn't realize was that his father wasn't just Robert, retired insurance investigator. I wasn't just some confused old man who couldn't understand legal documents. I was someone who'd spent 40 years as a senior legal investigator for the state's top fraud unit. Someone who'd built his entire career investigating fraudulent legal schemes and putting people exactly like David behind bars. The confrontation that changed everything happened 2 weeks ago when I returned from my morning walk to find David, Linda, and a man introduced as Attorney Morrison, estate planning specialist, sitting in my living room with legal documents spread across my coffee table. "Dad, you can't handle this paperwork anymore," David said, gesturing for me to sit while Linda organized power of attorney forms and guardianship applications. "We've got everything ready to make your life easier." The attorney stepped forward with official-looking contracts. "Mr. Robert, these documents will take care of everything. No more worrying about bills or legal stuff. We'll handle it all." I recognized every manipulation technique they were using because I'd spent my career investigating people who used these exact tactics against vulnerable elderly targets. The artificial urgency designed to prevent careful review, the implied threat about legal competency, the emotional pressure disguised as family concern. These are just standard papers for people your age, Attorney Morrison explained, presenting what appeared to be legitimate estate planning documents. Everyone needs this kind of help eventually. We just want to get it done before things get harder for you. He mistook my silence for surrender. Anyone who's been targeted by their own family knows that terrifying moment when you realize people you trusted are systematically destroying your independence while assuming you're too confused to understand their criminal conspiracy. But the real shock came later that night. That evening, I discovered the full scope of David's scheme by carefully reviewing the legal documents they'd pressured me to sign. Forged power of attorney agreements that granted David complete financial control, guardianship applications with predetermined conclusions about my mental capacity, property transfer documents that would liquidate my assets. David had been working systematically with Linda and Attorney Morrison to build a legal framework for stealing everything I owned. My house worth $750,000 that I'd owned free and clear for 42 years. My retirement accounts containing $380,000, the investment portfolio I'd built during 4 decades of careful financial planning. Total asset liquidation will generate approximately $1.2 million, Linda had written in notes I discovered. Once legal authority is established, we can initiate property sale and begin managed care placement while maintaining control over all financial decisions. But their scheme extended beyond simple asset theft. Linda had been researching secure memory care facilities that specialized in housing elderly residents whose family members controlled their finances. Places designed to prevent residents from challenging decisions or contacting outside legal help. Facility costs approximately $8,000 monthly, David had calculated in documents I found. Asset liquidation will cover placement expenses while generating substantial surplus for our investments. The scope of betrayal was staggering. David wasn't just planning to steal my life savings. He intended to warehouse me in institutional care while liquidating everything I'd built during 45 years of marriage to his mother. What David had completely forgotten was crucial information about his father that would obliterate their legal conspiracy entirely. He had no idea who he was dealing with. David made his fatal error when he submitted guardianship documentation that contained technical violations any experienced legal professional would immediately recognize. The flawed paperwork exposed their entire fraudulent operation. These legal papers have serious problems, I realized while examining their documentation. The timestamps were wrong. The witness signatures didn't match state records. I stayed quiet, but I noticed everything. What David didn't know was that I'd spent my career spotting exactly these types of fake legal papers. I recognized every mistake because I'd investigated similar cases involving elder abuse through manipulated court documents. Attorney Morrison's credentials don't check out, I discovered while cross-referencing his supposed qualifications. His license number belonged to someone who was disbarred 2 years ago for fraud, and that's when I knew something was very wrong. The legal authority he claimed didn't even exist in this state. The level of fraud was professionally sophisticated, but criminally reckless. David and Linda had created legal documentation that might deceive most elderly targets and their families, but they'd made critical procedural errors that any experienced legal investigator would identify within minutes. The power of attorney documents contained forged judicial approval and falsified medical evaluations, I confirmed while analyzing their court submissions. The authority requested exceeds normal legal boundaries, and the medical assessments cite non-existent psychological evaluations. David had constructed an elaborate legal fraud that any competent attorney could demolish through basic procedural challenges. His desperation to solve his financial problems had led him to attempt systematic elder abuse against someone whose career had been devoted to investigating these exact criminal conspiracies. Quiet people notice more than they say, and David was about to learn what 40 years of legal investigation had taught me about justice. That mistake cost him everything. I knew David's scheme was doomed when I contacted my former colleague, Detective Martinez, from the Elder Abuse Division, and Attorney Patricia from the state's top fraud unit. The investigation expanded rapidly once I'd reported systematic financial exploitation involving fraudulent legal documentation. "Robert, we've uncovered quite an extensive criminal operation," Patricia explained during our confidential meeting. fraudulent legal instruments, forged court documentation, systematic preparation for asset liquidation through manipulated guardianship proceedings. I spread comprehensive evidence across Patricia's conference table, copies of David's correspondence with memory care facilities, Linda's financial calculations showing planned asset distribution, Attorney Morrison's fabricated credentials, the forged legal documents with predetermined conclusions. We've identified similar schemes, targeting at least 12 other elderly victims, Detective Martinez added. Attorney Morrison has been providing fraudulent legal services for families attempting to gain financial control over elderly relatives across 4 counties. The investigation revealed that David had been following a criminal template provided by elder abuse networks. The fake legal documentation, the systematic creation of incidents, the rapid guardianship applications. It was a proven formula for stealing elderly people's assets. David's financial desperation made him vulnerable to recruitment by these criminal organizations, Detective Martinez explained. Linda connected him with Attorney Morrison through online forums that specifically target families with elderly relatives who have substantial assets. I'd been recording every conversation with David and Linda for weeks. Every admission, every fabricated concern, every discussion of their plans was preserved on digital files that would destroy them in court. He had no idea what I already knew about stopping systematic elder abuse through legal channels. The trap was almost ready. That week, I watched David's confidence begin deteriorating when I started asking specific questions about the legal documentation procedures and estate planning timeline. His explanations became increasingly defensive and contradictory. "Dad, why are you questioning Attorney Morrison's legal methods?" David asked nervously when I mentioned irregularities in the guardianship paperwork. "He's been recommended by multiple families for handling complex estate transitions. Some of the legal procedures seem unusual," I replied calmly. "The timeline for completing guardianship proceedings appears accelerated compared to standard court requirements." Linda jumped in frantically. "Mr. Robert, these are specialized legal instruments designed for elderly estate planning. The procedures might seem different from what you remember from decades ago." But I could see panic building behind their manufactured confidence. When I asked about specific state requirements for guardianship applications, David's answers became vague and evasive. When I questioned the legal authority granted by their documents, Linda became agitated and accused me of resisting necessary legal protection. "He keeps asking these detailed legal questions," I overheard Linda complaining to David. "It's like he understands more about legal procedures than he should. Maybe we need to expedite the guardianship filing immediately. Attorney Morrison says we have enough documentation to proceed with emergency legal intervention," David replied, but his voice was shaking. "We just need to prevent him from consulting outside attorneys before the court proceedings. Some wounds go deeper than money," and David was about to learn that betraying family through systematic legal fraud carries consequences he'd never imagined. He was losing control. The night before David's planned guardianship hearing, I sat in my study reviewing the comprehensive case file that would destroy their criminal legal conspiracy. Everything they had attempted was documented, recorded, and ready for presentation to law enforcement and the State Bar Association. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation David thought would complete his legal takeover of my assets. Instead, it would expose his systematic elder abuse and end his freedom permanently. I thought about my late wife, Margaret, who'd trusted David to respect my independence after her death. She'd believed we'd raised a son who understood legal ethics, family integrity, and protecting vulnerable people rather than exploiting them through fraudulent legal manipulation. The evidence painted a picture of calculated cruelty that exceeded simple financial greed. David had been planning to destroy my legal rights completely while using forged court documentation to justify stealing my life savings. David's scheme represents comprehensive elder abuse involving multiple felony violations, Detective Martinez had explained during our final briefing. Criminal conspiracy, fraudulent legal documentation, attempted grand theft, and violating state laws protecting elderly citizens from systematic exploitation. Tomorrow, David would discover that he'd targeted not just any vulnerable elderly widower, but someone whose career had been devoted to investigating legal fraud and protecting people from exactly the criminal conspiracy he'd attempted against his own father. Tomorrow, everything would change. The confrontation came exactly as planned when David, Linda, and attorney Morrison arrived for what they believed would be the final guardianship document signing. Their confidence was obvious as they entered my living room carrying their fraudulent legal instruments. "Dad, I'm so grateful you've decided to accept the legal protection you need," David began, taking his seat while Linda organized their forged documentation. "Once we complete these guardianship procedures, you won't need to worry about complex legal decisions anymore. The estate management arrangements attorney Morrison prepared will ensure your financial affairs are handled professionally," Linda added, presenting documents for my signature that would complete their criminal legal takeover. "You'll receive appropriate care while we manage all legal responsibilities." I looked at them calmly from my armchair, where Margaret and I had discussed our retirement plans and estate arrangements during 43 years of marriage. "Before I sign anything," I said quietly, "there's something important you've forgotten about your father." The front door opened. Patricia entered, followed by Detective Martinez and 2 additional officers whose credentials were clearly visible as they positioned themselves around the room. "David Mitchell and Linda Mitchell," Detective Martinez announced formally. "You're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, systematic fraud involving falsified legal documentation, and filing forged court instruments with intent to commit guardianship fraud." Complete silence. David's face went from confident to terrified in seconds. Linda began frantically gathering their forged papers, understanding that her criminal career was ending in multiple felony charges. Patricia simply pulled out my investigative case file and smiled. "David," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "you forgot who raised you." He realized what I truly was. Justice came quietly when state prosecutors filed comprehensive charges against David, Linda, and attorney Morrison. All 3 faced multiple felony counts related to systematic elder abuse conspiracy, including legal fraud, forgery, criminal impersonation, and violating state laws protecting elderly citizens from financial exploitation. The defendants are being charged with systematic elder financial abuse affecting 13 elderly victims across 4 counties, the prosecutor announced during their arraignment. They face 18 to 28 years in state prison. Attorney Morrison's fraudulent legal credentials were exposed publicly. David's consulting business collapsed immediately. Linda's assets were frozen as part of the criminal restitution investigation. 6 months later, I established the Margaret Foundation for Elder Legal Protection, training law enforcement and legal professionals to recognize fraudulent documentation schemes targeting elderly Americans. The foundation helped strengthen state protection laws and assisted dozens of families dealing with similar legal exploitation. The hardest part wasn't watching David's criminal conviction. It was knowing that Margaret would never understand how the son we'd raised with love and ethical guidance had become capable of systematic legal fraud against his own father. Sometimes the quietest revenge is simply remembering who you are when others choose to forget. David calculated that his elderly, confused father would be easy prey for sophisticated legal manipulation, but he'd forgotten the most crucial detail about his target. When David announced at the law office that I was confused about legal documents, he thought he was discrediting a helpless old man. He had no idea he was targeting someone who'd spent 40 years as a senior legal investigator for the state's top fraud unit, someone who'd built his career putting people exactly like David behind bars. My response wasn't what he expected. My response was justice served through proper legal channels, methodical investigation, and systematic prosecution. Justice stays silent, but some of us are older, and we're not blind.